So, from Kant we move on to Hegel, George William Friedrich Hegel, who lived between 1770 to 1831, great German philosopher and thinker. His philosophical system occupies a central place in the history of modern Western thought. Hegel's system was inspired by the French Revolution of 1789, which for him embodied the revolutionary struggle of the bourgeois class to gain supremacy over the ruling class. Hegel's works give expression to revolutionary bourgeois philosophy and ideals, and in this sense, Hegel is a product of enlightenment. He places supreme emphasis on reason and empiricism. Hegel's system may not be conventionally romantic, yet it is deeply influenced by certain characteristics that are romantic in nature. His thoughts reflect a synthesis of two major currents in European intellectual context, the Enlightenment and the Romanticism. So, in Hegel we find a mix of the two systems, and we also see how Hegelian system influenced the later romantics, particularly the English romantics, by way of being a mix of enlightenment and romanticism. We will talk about his major work, Phenomenology of Spirit, published in 1807. In this book, he argues that the first effort to postulate a philosophical ethic derives from the collapse of heroic culture. There was also a need to find alternative ways to secure people's efforts to be known as creators of meanings for their individual lives. For Hegel, the hero could win that meaning by conquest, standing over his victim, that is the person he has conquered. The successful warrior allowed him his life on the condition that he bow down to the hero's authority and become his follower. The successful warrior continually seeks new victims and new slaves. So, that is the heroic system, to constantly go on seeking new victims and going on conquering new people and new places, making them bow down to their authority, the winner's authority. It proves that slaves create a stable social order because they do not question, because renouncing the quest for heroic individuality allows them to win a mode of collective identity based on the forms their labor creates for nature. So, a stable order is created by slaves. Those forms provide enduring reflections of the meanings humans create along with the social bonds. Another important work, Hegel's Lectures on Aesthetics, and these mark a strong phase in the dialectic of classic versus romantic. Hegel describes all art into three stages: symbolic, classic and romantic. For Hegel, there is more moral energy in romantic, but less beauty. In pre-classical art, spirit sought a space it could set against the tyranny of sense. So, the art emphasized the power to set its own internal meaning against appearances, for example, the pyramids. At the stage of symbolic art, the spiritual content or idea is still indefinite and obscure. Spiritual meaning is attached arbitrarily to objects in nature, and a true correspondence between content and form does not occur. This art exaggerates and distorts a natural phenomenon. With classical art, for Hegel, the emphasis shifts to celebrating the integration of spirit with sensuous matter significantly in the idealized bodies of the 5th century Greek sculpture. Finally, romantic art, for Hegel, it achieves a state at once subjective and universal. Subjective because it calls on modes of being that cannot be captured within appearance, yet universal because it establishes its own forming energies as a transpersonal content. Here, art self-consciousness becomes because not the end, but the medium which then only philosophy can make fully articulate. All German Romanticism and Romantic criticism was concerned with the problem of how literature reconciles sensory experiences and ideas. Their criticism was thus devoted to the problem of how literature reconciles the worldly with the transcendental and the external material object with the spiritually reliable. We have already seen that Kant's critique of judgment is an account of judgment was a decisive statement in the history of modern general aesthetics and at once exerted a strong influence upon literary aesthetics. I am just recapping Kant for you. So, Kant, if you remember, had mapped the world of necessary physical events, the free moral world of our choices and also the mediational concept of the aesthetic values, the beautiful and the sublime. Kant's idea of beauty was severe. It related to the formal, decorative and abstract, to Greek designs, foliations on wallpaper, arabesques and music. Music without lyrics. So, the charm of direct sensuous pleasure might fuse with beauty and beauty might be combined with perfect natural forms, but in neither of these cases was beauty pure. Beauty allied to the good was not free beauty, but dependent beauty. Now, Hegel's philosophy was tremendously influenced by the works of Kant. Hegel was the most influential proponent of the latter day historicism. Hegel considers human history as a progress of absolute mind or consciousness toward self-conscious freedom. According to him, when our minds have become rational, we shall freely consent to live by the laws and our socio-political arrangements. Hegel also talks about moving towards self-consciousness. As consciousness moves to higher levels, it perceives that what it previously took as the external world, as something alien and foreign to it, is in fact constituted by its own operations. What was earlier assumed as substance is now recognized as subjectivity. Thus, entire movement is a progression from substance to subject. The notion of dialectic is another important feature of Hegel's thought. This is an important aspect of his system and it operates on three broad levels: logical, phenomenological and historical. The dialect is a mode of thinking that recognizes that the self and the world stand in necessary connection, that thought is not a static system of classification, but a self-criticizing process, and that reality is not what it appears to be. For Hegel, what is real is rational and what is rational is real, and this is something that most philosophers are always preoccupied with, the notion of reality. What is the truth? So, reality and its representation. So, we have been seeing this conflict from the times of Plato, and in Hegelian thought it is much more to a greater degree articulated. So, reality for Hegel is rational, historically progressive and unified. It responds to the demands of our own rational selves. Hegel's model of reflexive activity is central to the arts and literary criticism because it marks the limitations of those approaches that concentrate only on mimetic relations between work and world. For Hegel, expressive acts not only represent worlds, but also constitute modes of emotional and intellectual intensity for those worlds. These acts are also in constant tension with established principles of representation, at once negating them and opening a way for originality. Hegel's thought influenced literary theory in the relationship to the way we understand the way the mind comes to handle these situations, forms and differences. Talking about Hegel's notion of aesthetics. So, Hegel sees art and beauty as a realm that belongs to sense, feeling, intuition and imagination. Its realm is basically different from that of thought and it is precisely the freedom of production and configuration we enjoy in the beauty of art. The source of works of art is the free activity of fancy, which in its imagination is itself more free than nature is. Art for Hegel must be free. It must fulfill the same functions and ends as other disciplines. Art should also stand with relative independence according to Hegel. Art can be distinguished from other modes of expression in its ability to present even the most abstract ideas in sensuous form. Thus, art reconciles the world of sense and intellect, the external and the internal. Art helps to perceive reality by organizing the chaos and contingency of the world such that we can see the true meaning of appearances. So, art perhaps helps us realize the truth, the reality. Okay, so, art and beauty and how they can help us understand what is real. Thus, for Hegel, the reality in art is higher than original or ordinary reality, ordinary conceptualization of reality. Art caters to the universal and eternal powers, and again here you can see how Hegel echoes Philip Sidney and also Aristotle. Hegel adds that art is not the highest mode of expressing truth of the spirit and comes only after religion and philosophy. So, religion and philosophy are given a higher place than art. For Hegel, art must express the truth of spirit, and he insists on the autonomy of art. Its expression of spiritual truth is not in the interests of pleasure, morality or instruction. Rather, this expression of truth is an end in itself and is the purpose of art. Let us see what Hegel thinks about tragedy. According to Hegel, the differences which obtain between classes such as the ruled and the rulers are no doubt essential to the notion of state life and are founded on reason, for they are caused by the inevitable articulation of the organic community and assert themselves as such through the specific forms of occupation, disposition, modes of life and general levels of education in all their branches. It is another matter, however, when these differences as they affect individuals are determined absolutely by the accident of birth, so that the individual man from the very start is not on account of any quality in himself, but solely through the accident of nature, irrevocably relegated to a particular class or caste. On general principles, no doubt, distinctions of class can be justified, but at the same time, no individual should be wholly robbed of his right to determine as his choice may direct to which particular class he shall belong. Now, with all this, as it is very obvious, Hegel anticipates Romanticism as we understand through the English Romanticism. Now, Hegel's aesthetic had a pervasive influence on both literature and criticism. Hegel influenced some of Freud's ideas concerning the development of identity. He also influenced Saussure's ideas concerning language. The Frankfurt School members such as Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Walter Benjamin, Herbert Marcuse, Habermas, all these Frankfurt school members have accepted the influence of certain features of Hegel's thought on Marxism. Hegel was the foremost thinker to highlight the notion of difference, relatedness and of human identity as a social phenomenon. As a result, philosophers such as Sartre, Dubois, Lacan, Derrida and Lyotard, they have all been indebted to Hegel to some extent or other. So, now we we talk about French and German Romanticism. Now, we all know Romanticism was a broad intellectual and artistic movement that developed towards the end of the 18th century. Now, developing certain ideas of Kant, the Romantics often insisted on artistic autonomy and attempted to free art from moral and utilitarian constraints. Romantics placed high emphasis on uniqueness, originality and broadening the horizons of experience. Though Kant is hardly a romantic, many of the romantics looked to his ideas as their starting point, particularly his concept of imagination. Romanticism is often understood as a movement at conflict with enlightenment. However, it derived many of its ideas from the ideas of Kant and Hegel. Now, in the late 18th century, Germany witnessed the rise of the Sturm and Drang, that is a storm and stress movement in literature. And you can see how writers such as Schiller and Goethe were key exponents of this movement, and how these ideas seem to have influenced the later romantics. Now, talking about Schiller, Friedrich von Schiller, who lived between 1759 and 1805. Schiller was a dramatist, poet and literary theorist. Schiller's works examine the inward freedom of the soul that enables the individual to rise above physical frailties and the pressure of material conditions. His two most well-known works on literary criticism are On the Aesthetic Education of Man and On Naive and Sentimental Poetry. Schiller posits in the aesthetic education, utility is the great ideal of the time for which all power slave and all talent should pay homage. He urges to keep beauty before freedom. The function of the art for Schiller must be to educate and elevate the human race towards a new ideal, one in which human beings through aesthetic experience have reconciled the antagonism within themselves between sense and intellect, nature and reason. According to Schiller, the Greeks combined both imagination and reason in a glorious humanity. In the modern world, these attributes are fragmented. If Greek society was formed by all uniting nature, modern culture is based on all dividing understanding. So, that is the key difference. In the Greek world, there was a harmony between individual and state and organic wholeness. The modern world is torn by dualisms. Schiller anticipates Hegel and Marx on the concept of alienation and estrangement. Though he admired the classical writers, Schiller challenges the denigration of modern poetry by prescriptive neoclassicism, which inferred its model or based its model on ancient poetry alone. Schiller suggests that instead of turning to Arcadia, that is an idyllic kind of a land, we should proceed towards Elysium. Elysium is a state in which the ideal of beautiful humanity is realized through a fusion of the naive and sentimental characters. I quote Schiller to you and his concept of art. Everlastingly changed to a single little fragment of the whole, man himself develops into nothing but a fragment. Everlastingly in his ear the monotonous sound of the wheel and the wheel that he turns, he never develops the harmony of his being, and instead of putting the stamp of humanity upon his own nature, he becomes nothing more than the imprint of his occupation or of his specialized knowledge. So, for Schiller, modern man is fragmented, he just remains what is his specialized knowledge rather than striving to be a whole, as the classics were. Schiller's ideas influenced the romantic thought as they urged the artist to turn away from reality and to seek inspiration from an ideal world. His notion of self-conscious artistry had a far-reaching influence on German Romanticism. From Schiller, we move on to Germaine de Stael, the French writer who was one of the thinkers of the Enlightenment period. She advocated the cause of Romanticism while anticipating later developments in realism. Her writings offended Napoleon and she was sent in exile from France. She was a firm believer in freedom and historical progress. Her literary criticism is contained in the book On Literature Considered in its Relationship to Social Institutions, which was published in 1800. Here she examines the various social obstacles to the success of women writers, and she advocates the education and enlightenment of women. In England, the early English romantics included Thomas Gray, Oliver Goldsmith and Robert Burns. The first major figure of this epoch was William Blake, who saw the world as a place that endangers inherently contradictory thought, and he tried to attempt a reconciliation by bringing in his own philosophy of mysticism. English Romanticism attained its peak with Wordsworth and Coleridge. Coleridge, as we all know, drew upon the works of Kant and Fichte and elaborated the concept of poetic imagination, which we are going to deal with in our subsequent classes. And here are some references for you to look at. I would ask you to look at this particular link, the Stanford Edu, and then this is a book by H.B. Nisbet, German Aesthetic and Literary Criticism. So, thank you very much. We meet for our next class on English Romanticism.